you to the next series of collaboration between ECHO and WHO and UNICEF when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, a partnership where we connect with all of you, and we're set for a series. I leave over to Bruce Strominger to go through a few parts of technical information and housekeeping. Over to you, Bruce.
Great, thank you, Anne. Next slide. Louis, if you can advance the slides. Thank you. I'm just going to be running through a few housekeeping items. And the first is that we are offering interpretation today in both French and Spanish. And you can access that by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom right of the Zoom toolbar and selecting the language that you would like to hear. If you only want to hear the interpreted language and not the original language in the background, click on the mute original audio button. Next slide. We are really looking forward to all your questions and comments. Please place those in the Q&A feature, which is just to the left of that interpretation icon. If you have any IT or logistical questions, or if you have a question about the certificate of attendance, please put that in the chat and we'll try to help you out as best we can. Next slide, please. We are also offering a live transcript, essentially closed captioning. And just if you're interested in seeing that in English, it's only offered in English, choose the show subtitle and captions will appear on the screen. To close that, click hide subtitle. So you should see a live transcript CC icon, which is now in between the Q&A and the interpretation icons. Just a note about recordings and the certificate of attendance. This session is being recorded and your attendance is consent to be recorded. They will be shared. The recordings in English, French, and Spanish will all be shared afterwards through an email, follow-up email, as well as on the TechNet 21 website. And we'll share how to access that in the chat a little later. A certificate of attendance will be available through the University of New Mexico, where Project ECHO is based. We'll share a link to that in the chat about 15 minutes before the end of today's session. There'll be a brief survey that should take about 3 or 4 minutes to complete. We really look forward to your feedback. It's how we will do our own internal quality improvement, and we'll look forward to giving you that certificate of attendance after you complete the survey. Next slide. Just a note about data use. We take data stewardship very seriously and want you to know your individual data will be de-identified and kept confidential, and what data is shared with WHO is all aggregated and de-identified. Next slide. With that, it's my pleasure to hand the microphone back to Anne Lindstrom for the formal welcome and introduction.
So warm everyone from all over the world. I put in the chat a warm welcome, and if you want, and if you can, please put your name and country that you're representing in the chat so that we can see the flavor of everything, where you're coming from. We know that most of you are deeply involved in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout enterprise in your different parts around the world. And we have had previously, many of you join our previous series of ECHO sessions on the delivery of COVID, where we are trying to have a good exchange on the challenges, the trainings on each part, discussions with you on the planning, what is needed on demand. Now we're starting a new series of collaboration with ECHO, which we are very delighted to do. And this series we have named Costing, Budgeting, Finance, and Delivery. The first couple of sessions, and you'll see the schedule later, is particularly about this because we know that most of you have now, almost all countries around the world have already introduced the COVID-19 vaccine. But what do we have next is you've all learned so much from what are the obstacles in your different countries. And what we have heard from many countries is that costing, budgeting, and financing is the bottleneck that needs particular proper planning to know how would you cost it, because you in each country are deciding on the next path in the rollout. So next slide. Luis, if you go to the next slide. The importance of this is very urgent actually now. So these are only the 91 AMC countries. And if you access to different doses that are coming to countries right now, there will be a massive surge coming in countries through many different channels, COVAX and others, in the next couple of 6 months. And so on this slide, you can see on the right-hand side, the number of doses so far, administered in Q2 when it comes to the COVAX doses, or about the COVAX doses. And then you look at the Q4 supply from the different places that are coming here, bilateral, COVAX, AU, multilateral, and domestic. There will be something like 2 billion doses that needs to be administered in the next, only in Q4, the last. So that is a 15-time ramp up of the number of doses that needs to go out daily and be administered into the arms of people. Extraordinary accomplishment for countries to be able to do this ramp up of doses. There needs to be actions now to start the planning, put the operational funding in place, and scale up so that the workers are actually there to be able to deliver the vaccines. This is good news because so far we have all been frustrated about the unequal access to doses and the trickling down of too little doses coming to really low-income countries. We need to change that to make doses more equitably distributed. And then a thorough planning is the first step to be able to take care of the ramp up that we are seeing coming in very soon. Next slide. So to help the COVAX collaborators in the country readiness and delivery workstream have updated a plan, a guidance that you may have seen before or worked on, the National Deployment and Vaccination Plan. This was what was uploaded to the partners platform to get access to the COVAX doses from the beginning. And now we're where really the ambition of every country needs to be set. How many percentage do you want to reach, the 20, the 30, or even higher percent? 30, 40, 50% of coverage in the populations. And so what we're hoping to do is planning in the next couple of weeks, training sessions and support to support in the next revamp and refresh of this National Deployment and Vaccination Plan. what is the level of ambition? How is the target planned? What are the new target populations that you might want to do? And then working on all the bottlenecks that you've already identified in the initial rollout. What I hope is that all countries then, in conjunction with the Gavi applications, will be uploading the plans and the costing on the partners platform. So this is one we will be covering in details today by all the other different speakers. But I just wanted to give you the context of where we are and why we're doing these, importance of the ramp up and the importance of proper country planning at the moment. And next slide. I turn off my camera because internet is breaking up, so I hope this is better. So let me just finalize two slides, publications and the next steps. So we have you will have in the slide deck is a link to all the different toolkits of introductions and guidance available for every country in the introduction of COVID-19 vaccines. A few of the new ones is a post-introduction evaluation document, a guide on how you design with a systematic method the evaluation of the COVID-19 programs, and then how you learn from that when it comes to the second one is a guidance on utilization of COVID-19 vaccines before the date of expiry. It's coming soon. And it is really about, we know the challenges that are out there. We don't want any doses to go wasted. It's important to optimally use them. The shelf life is ending. Some of the vaccines coming out are short shelf life. So this is a guidance on how to think about it, how to plan ahead, how to calculate the uptake in your country, and hopefully this will be a support in the rollout. And then also wanted to say that there is also guidance on how to conduct vaccine effectiveness evaluation to variants. So there is a guidance particularly on how to evaluate this and the importance for all of us on the variants of concern. Next slide. Very soon there will also be guidance on micro planning and others. So please check out on our website on the toolbox. Finally, I want to say that we're starting a series of webinars on demand-driven digital solutions and innovations in support of COVID-19 vaccine deployment. So this week, next, and the week after, there are different time zones and different webinars where opportunities for funding and support and help desk on finding the best possible available. And here you have the link in the slide decks that you will have available after this session. So now I'm leaving over to Angela to take us through the agenda of the day and the outline and all the presentations. Over to you, Angela.
Great, thanks so much, Anne. So let's look to the next slide. We're going to give you a brief overview of what you expect to see today. And so of the 15 sessions, the 15 different presentations we have in this second series, we kick off today very excitedly with the first one on how to apply for Gavi CDS funding through the WHO COVID-19 Partners Platform. You can see that the second and third ones here are also related to financing. I'll give you a quick preview of that at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. The remaining sessions that extend through to the end of the year are listed here. We're in the process of sorting through the country-specific learnings. Very excited to hear from the countries and from the field. And you see the lineup through to the end of the year to December. Next slide, please. And so as we transition to this agenda for today, what we have queued up after our great level setting and context building by Anne is a big picture from Ula Griffiths on costing, budgeting, financing, the context, the challenges, the potential solutions. Then we shift to our speaker from Gavi, Lindsay Cole, to talk about the CDS funding channel, particularly focusing on the early access portion of the envelope through the COVAX facility. And then we'll end with how to actually upload your application onto the partners platform. We'll take a handful of questions in between each session, as well as have a larger Q&A at the end, and then close out the session for today. Next slide. And so why don't we, so with regard to the goals of the overall series, the goal is to support countries in not only assessing, but also supporting your immediate and your medium-term needs in the urgent delivery and scale-up of COVID-19 vaccines. For today specifically, we're going to provide an overview of the context that you know very well. We will explain the Gavi CDS funding channel, specifically the early access application process, and just touch briefly on introducing the longer term window. And lastly, we'll demonstrate how to upload the Gavi application through a series of screenshots, as well as some open office hours and demonstrations forthcoming, and in addition to those that have already passed, some of you may have attended already, if you need some more assistance. Next slide. So I believe what we're going to do is a poll. And so as we queue up for that poll, let me sit on this slide briefly to kind of introduce the Partners platform for those who may not have seen it. The Partners platform is anchored at WHO. It provides a central place to upload your plans, as you know, from uploading the NDVP. You can also upload your country needs through your civic tool or manually input in your civic needs, as well as you can go view current donor mapping at the country, regional, or at the global level. The link to the platform is embedded in the slide, and highlighted on the bottom is really where you could download information on the Gavi CDS application, as well as actually upload your application into the TA resource needs portion of the platform. Next slide. So as we prepare to shift, we have thought we would warm up with the poll. For those of you who have attended this series in the past, this is a great chance and an opportunity to hear from you. So we've queued up two questions. The first is, have you accessed the WHO COVID-19 Partners platform to download the CDS early access application form? So the answers are yes or no. You should be able to go in and input in your answer. And the second question is, when do you plan on submitting your CDS early access requests? First option is this week or next week. The second is sometime in July. Third option is sometime in August. And last option is don't currently have plans to submit a CDS early access request. So why don't we open up the poll to have some interaction with our panel, with our folks, our attendees. Happy to see approaching 200 attendees today. And let's go ahead and enter into the poll. So as you're answering, you are seeing the poll. That's great. And do we have poll answers that we have 84 answers? Why don't we leave it open for about another 10, 15 more seconds for folks to be able to click for the first question, as well as the second question. And let's see, as an interim result, what we have now, whenever Echo India is ready, why don't we go ahead and show those, and then we can do another projection and a couple of more slides to see what folks have had. So we have a large proportion of the attendees have not yet accessed the forum. So hopefully this webinar is helpful to let you know where it is and how to find it. And the second, in terms of when you plan on submitting your request, it looks like a large proportion sometime in July and August. If we scroll down, we have about half of the participants currently not planning to submit an application request, though that may or may not change. So thanks for those who have chimed in on the 94 some odd. And why don't we go ahead and shift to the next speaker we have. Ula, are you on from UNICEF? So if you can unmute, oh, you look great. And if you, yep, let me hand the microphone over to you. Thanks so much, Ula, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Welcome, everybody. So I'm Ula Griffiths from UNICEF in New York, and I've worked extensively on looking at the cost and financing of COVID-19 vaccines since I guess it's almost a year ago now that all this craziness started. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to go through is, first of all, what we know about the cost of delivering COVID-19 vaccines. We've done some global estimates, then talk a bit about how we can do better to try and do planning and budgeting at country level, and then the most important knowledge gaps. And then I'm going to go through sources of financing for COVID-19 vaccine procurement and delivery, also talk about the knowledge gaps we have there. Next slide. Okay, so in February this year, we did complete some estimates, sort of ballpark estimates of what it would cost to deliver COVID-19 vaccine in 92 AMC countries. So this study was done just using the best available information that we have with regard to infant vaccination. And then we made assumptions about what we thought it would take extra according to all the different items. I'll show you the items afterwards. The difference, because of COVID-19 vaccine, of course, targets a different target group than infants. So we did make like assumptions, etc. And what we found was that delivery of covering the first 20% of the population in 92 AMC countries, which hopefully will be achieved by the end of this year if Anne's prediction of all these doses coming in the latter part of this year holds true. So we estimated that the total financial cost would be $2 billion. So when I say financial cost, it was really because we were looking at the extra. So we didn't try and value not even the staff time, but because we were assuming staff was already in place, we didn't value buildings, etc. It was really all the extras. And as you can see, we assumed, oh no, that's the next slide, but we assumed fixed site and outreach delivery. We assumed that most would actually be outreach delivery. We looked at in-country delivery cost, and then also at global and regional level, what activities should be done. Next slide. Okay, so this is the breakdown. So we had 14 cost categories. So if you look at the right column, all the way to the right, what we found that social mobilization, which is really demand generation, amounted to 18%. Again, we did this really before delivery started, and using just our assumptions. But we all know that this is a really important component of COVID-19 vaccine. And then per diem for outreach, and that was 33% of overall cost. So this is because we assumed a lot of vaccines would be delivered during outreach. Again, all this needs to be, now that we know more how countries are going to do it, we can do new estimates and look at it. But this was just the assumptions we did at that time, because we were thinking you need to go out and find this specific target group. But things have evolved now, and it's as if there's much more broad-based delivery, not really looking for specific target groups, but just really broad. So almost everybody is welcome in some countries now. Next slide. Okay, so it's really helpful to look at per dose supplied and per dose delivered, because these are just benchmark values. And especially donors, they really just want to know broad-based. So I think that's one thing we have learned. We don't have to be too exact in this pandemic, because we just need to move on and get these vaccines out. So the difference between cost per dose supplied and cost per dose delivered, that's really the wastage rate. So in this, we assume the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is also need to be refined now. We have so many different vaccines coming, which comes in a 10-dose vial, and we assume 10% vaccine wastage. So cost per dose delivered is after accounting for wastage. So as you can see, it varies, of course, according to countries. So we assume different prices according to different countries, but the average was 1.58 per dose delivered, which then amounts to $3.15 per person. Next slide. All right, so we didn't include human resource, as I mentioned before, but there has been a lot of talk about that there's not enough staff available to deliver these vaccines, and therefore we need surge cost. The issue is where to really find these people. And this is something, when I get to the knowledge gap, I think this is something we really need to look at. But WHO Health Workforce Department, they have estimated it's really a broad range because we just know so little. But one of the estimates, it was $1 billion. So when we add that on top, we get to 3 billion. Again, I think this is really something we need to refine much better. In the left-hand chart, we've compared these costs with the 2018 government health expenditures, which was the most recent year we had. And as you can see from low-income countries, it does amount to a large proportion of health expenditures. So almost 20%, and then it decreased according to lower middle-income country and upper middle-income countries. It's much more manageable. On the right-hand side, you just see the totals also according to these income groups. So whether you include this surge cost could matter a lot, but I think we need to collect we need to collect more data about what the real cost is in country level. Next slide. Okay, so this slide, when it comes up, so we skip a slide, we skip one slide. Okay, but that slide was about really what we need to do at country level. So I think in this session, this is what you're going to talk about in the upcoming webinars. But what I want to say is that you might have heard about the CIVIC COVID-19 Vaccine Introduction Costing Tool, which is a detailed Excel sheet that can be filled in and come up with some quite specific estimates. We have in the NDVPs, of course, there's a budget section. You do your plan and then you need to budget it. This is things we need to work much more on, because the NDVPs that were submitted in the first round, those budgets were not very specific. We are working on a budget template based on the global costing, where we take those same categories, and then, as I showed you before, we had cost per dose, and then we're putting in the benchmarks we got according to all the different items. So for instance, PPE or training, we can tell you what the range was, for instance, 0.5 cents per dose for some of these, and that might be helpful to do like a rough estimate. So that's something we're working on now, should be available this week. Next slide. Okay, so the next slide is really what I think is the most important knowledge gaps for cost. So I already mentioned the human resource, opportunity, and search costs. If data could be collected on that, so to what extent, what we, for instance, is assuming that you can reallocate human resources to undertake the vaccines, which of course needs to happen, but what is the proportion of the staff that are going to work on immunization, and to what extent are new staff being recruited or as a search? We have really not compiled any cost of the ultra-prone chain needed for Pfizer vaccine, so that's also a knowledge gap, because that vaccine is being rolled out in more and more countries now. Then also we need more data on the cost according to different strategies, so outreach, health facility, campaigns, mass vaccination sign, depending on what countries are going to do here in the latter part of the year. We're really great to collect some data to look at the differences. So the way I ordered them is how I expect outreach to be most expensive, then health facility, then campaigns, and then mass vaccination site as the cheapest. And then lastly, I do have one slide on this, is really the cost of vaccine procurement. Next slide. So vaccine procurement, we have the problem that it's vaccine prices, many of them are being kept confidential, and it's actually quite a messy situation. As you know, there are many bilateral deals, and we just, on this COVID-19 dashboard, UNICEF market dashboard, it's great they've published what prices are available in the public domain, but it's not at all the prices. But you can see, I think it's very interesting if you just look, you can see the range, $40 per dose, $4 per dose, $15 per dose. It's really all over the place, depending on what deals countries get. So I think more work on this would be really important. But it's just great that at least we have some prices there, because transparency is one of the things that can drive down prices when countries know what others are paying. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to financing. So financing options for delivering this vaccine and procuring it are these 6. So raising new revenues, reprioritizing, external financing, additional borrowing, debt restructuring and forgiveness, and efficiency gain. And as you can just see, all of these are difficult. There is no easy solution here. This is a new intervention we have to introduce, and finding the money is not fun. So I guess raising new revenues is very difficult in this during a pandemic. Reprioritize is also really hard, but that's probably what's happening. External financing is, for some countries, the best bet here, and that's what I will look at in the next slide. Next slide. So we have, okay, no, so I think I can see the next line coming. That's sort of a preliminary analysis we did on budgets that we could find, Ministry of Health budgets, to see to what extent they have budgeted for COVID-19 vaccine. So because this is a pandemic that surprised everybody, very little went into the budgets for this year. I can't see the slide now, but we looked at many budgets. Yeah, so you can see the budgets available. These are the 92 countries. So we found budgets for many countries, but only the ones you see in the left, in that red box, were the ones that actually put something in. So Indonesia and Philippines, they budgeted for the vaccine. And as you can see, it was a big proportion of their health budgets, 11 and 12%. Honduras increased their health budgets by 14.2%. And then Senegal, Bhutan, Cameroon, Congo, and PNG, they had a budget for overall COVID-19 response. So that's what we could find in this preliminary analysis. We're still working more on this, also finding more of the new 2022 budgets to see what is happening here. So I think this is something that's really important to look at. What impact is this going to have on the Ministry of Health budget? If the budget doesn't increase, and if it's reprioritizing, of course, it's not good. Next slide. So the remaining of the slides, that's about external financing. So this is something we've been monitoring at UNICEF just in this Excel tracking sheet. So one thing we're looking at is the World Bank loans, which I know many of you probably heard of, that the World Bank have put a considerable amount of money available for COVID-19 vaccine procurement and delivery. So we are tracking this, and these data will also be uploaded to the partners platform. But it's important just to have a sheet as well where we have quality checks and we know where data is coming from, and we're analyzing it. So next slide. So what we found is that at the moment, actually, so this is only delivery. So we're not looking at the vaccine procurement, and that's also what we are monitoring. As I said, vaccine procurement is not easy to get to because a lot of this is not public. So the numbers in blue here are the ones available for delivery. So for instance, the World Bank, they have a 12 billion window. It's actually increased now. So I think it's 20 billion now. But many of large proportion of their loans or grants are for vaccine procurement. Delivery is approximately 18%. So actually 859 million are available at the moment for delivery, and from ADB 244 million. Then on the right-hand side, these are bilateral donors and Gavi, and also a considerable amount of money has been available. The 775 million you can see from USA, Germany, and Canada, that's what's funding the CDS delivery support that you're going to talk about in the remaining of the session. But basically, we have 2.3 billion pledged. So here I'm saying pledged because not all of it is on the ground. So for instance, CDS is not there yet, and the World Bank loans, even if the project has been approved, not a lot has actually materialized in countries available to spend. But the conclusion is that we estimated it was going to take $2 billion to deliver these vaccines, and it looks as if this is available if we can get our public financial management systems to move a bit faster. Next slide. Right, so here what we did, we assumed what if all countries need to reach 30% of the population, and then we wanted to look at, as I told you before, delivering a dose was around $1.50. So here we are looking at what is it per person. So you can see to the right hand side, some countries, these are really small island states, and not surprisingly, they have received above in bilateral and World Bank loans above $20 per person for delivery. But then many countries have received less than $1 per dose. So we have this by country trying to monitor. Next slide. Okay, so this is my last slide about the most important knowledge gaps for financing. So as I said already, what are the financing sources for the vaccine procurement bilateral deals? Where is this money coming from? I think that would be really interesting to look at. Changes in government funds allocated to health. What are we seeing? It could go both ways. The Ministry of Health budget could increase due to this extra intervention that needs to be delivered, or it could be reduced due to the pandemic because of less revenue available. So that would be really good to look at. Another thing that would be good to look into and monitor is the process and time between approval of multilateral development bank loans and then the funds actually being available for vaccine delivery. If we could get some more data on this, that'd be really great. So that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ulla. So we had one question in the Q&A around requirement for the regional review committees for the NDVP. I've answered it in the box. There won't be a requirement. I don't see any other burning questions. So why don't we transition on to Lindsay Cole from Gavi to talk about the CDS early access window. And as folks have questions, type them in the chat box. We'll answer them, or we'll take them in the Q&A time that we have later on. So Lindsay, over to you.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everybody. Let me quickly introduce myself before I launch into the presentation. My name is Lindsay Cole, and I'm the head of the funding design and review team at the Gavi Alliance. I am here to speak to you about the CDS COVID-19 delivery support early access window, which we've just opened at the beginning of July, to give you a bit of an overview of what it's all about, what we are prepared to fund. And then I think I will hand it over to Louis, who's going to walk you through a bit of the how to apply. And between the two of us, we hope we can answer any questions you have on how to access this funding. So if we can go to the next slide. The CDS window is, as I mentioned, has just been launched at the beginning of July. It is a $775 million window. So it speaks to some of that overall funding landscape that various donors are making available that Ulla mentioned during her presentation. And really the essence of the funding window is to help prepare all of the AMC 92 countries within the COVAX facility to scale up COVID-19 vaccine delivery coming towards the end of the year. So as Anne mentioned, at the beginning of her presentation, we anticipate a fairly significant ramp up in the availability of COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility coming towards the end of the year. And we realize in order to get ready for that ramp up and ensure that you have all of the resources and plans and people in place to get those vaccines delivered, that you need to start planning now and also preparing to ensure that you have the funding available to eventually deliver the vaccines. So what you see here on this overarching slide is how the funds will be allocated. We have 650 million of that 775 million, which is going directly to country support for the AMC 92 countries. Of that amount, we've released a small amount already prior to the launch of July to help countries that had existing COVAX doses that were struggling to get them out because of a shortage of funds. But the bulk of the funding is coming through this full CDS envelope, with up to 350 million of that available through this early access window. And I'll go through some of the specifics of that in just a second. There is then going to be a second phase of access to these funds, which is still in development. So we'll come back to you a bit later with the specifics on how to apply for that. But that will release the remainder of that $650 million tranche to all of the AMC 92 countries. And really, as I said at the beginning, the key piece of this is that we want to ensure that you have all of the planning in place and all of the resources in place to get those COVID-19 vaccine doses that are coming towards the end of this year out as rapidly as possible. In addition to the 650 million, there is another 125 million approximately that's been put aside for some cross-cutting investments. Those include issues trying to finance things around risk mitigation, some global support to TA, and certain global innovation investments. So those you'll start to hear more about in the coming weeks, and we can provide you additional information on those. But know that for all of the AMC 92 countries, the main focus for you is this $650 million that is available through the CDS window. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll talk through a bit more. Can we go to the next slide? Super. So this just gives a bit more of the timelines for what we are preparing for with the CDS window. So I spoke about the bridge funding, which is something that happened over the last few months in kind of urgent needed cases. We are now at this phase for the next 2 months where we have the early access window open, and then we anticipate that in August we'll open the larger window, which will allow the remainder of the funds to be available. And we'll have an application that is grounded somehow in the NDDP. And so that's where Anne's call at the beginning of this meeting, to make sure that you are kind of rethinking your planning, doing the costing that you can in order to kind of estimate what your needs are, obviously understanding what resources you have already available through government, other donor sources is quite important. So if you could start focusing on that now, I know many people are already well in the weeds with that, but please continue to focus on that, that when this second round opens up, you're prepared to submit an application. For the early access window, there are just a few questions that you're asked to answer, and you'll see those on the right here. You should have been given from your senior country manager an indicative envelope that you can access at this stage. And essentially what you are required to ask back from us is how much of that envelope you want to access, a brief description of what your needs are and why, giving a bit of a breakdown based on the NDVP categories of how you're going to use the funds, and then making sure that you obviously identify who those funds are going to go to. And finally, giving a bit of a summary of what efforts you are undertaking at the moment to update your NDVP with, again, that look towards the bigger envelope and the anticipation that that will be an essential part of the application. If we can then go to the next slide, I'll talk through a bit the principles of what the CDS funding is for, and then I'll take you through some of the high level pieces of the guidance and direct you to where you can find more details before handing it over to Louis. So very quickly, the main reasons that we have made the CDS funding available is to make sure that we're able to mitigate delivery risks. We have seen, obviously, through these first deliveries of COVAX doses, that while a lot of countries have processes in place to secure funding for their rollout, that those are not always available in a timely way. So a lot of the CDS funding is about ensuring that there is funding available kind of at the time that you have the doses and you're able to get those out and delivered as fast as possible. We do want to make sure that all of the funding that you're using from the CDS window is complementary, obviously, to any other funding sources. So please be ready to show that complementarity. We're trying to make this as agile a process as possible and minimize transaction costs. And that's where the NDVP plays a big role, because we see that as a key kind of picture of the funding landscape and the overall planning for the vaccine delivery. We do want to make sure that we've got equality in terms of the funding support that is going to all of the AMC 92 countries, and that is also based on funding needs. So that's where the work around kind of costing and budgeting of the NDVP is really essential in making sure that you can show the full funding landscape for what your sources of funding are and what your gaps are, and being able to identify specifically those funding gaps when you articulate your request to Gavi will be quite important. And then finally, we want to emphasize the kind of benefit of looking at expanding partnerships through this, through the process of rolling out COVID-19 vaccines, and also as you think through how you'll use the CDS funding window, noting that in particular, once the kind of early vaccine doses get out, as you start to scale up more, that it may be important to look to more non-traditional partners to get the vaccines rolled out in a completed way as possible. One thing just to note here is that for the early access window, because of the speed element of it, that we are limiting that funding to existing Gavi Fund recipients. So make sure for this early access window that you're only asking the funding to be sent to existing fund recipients. That will just save some time. But for the larger window of support, and something to already think through now, is what additional partnerships you might be wanting to engage for the full rollout. And if we just go to the last slide, I will just at a very high level talk through kind of what is eligible for funding. So you can use the CDS funding for essentially all elements of your NDVP, with the exception of procurement of vaccines and related devices, hopefully for obvious reasons, because that support is coming through the COVAX facility in a separate way. We do encourage you to think about how you need to use those funds for technical assistance. I know many countries already have TA plans for 2021 in place, but in particular, as you start to think through 2022 planning, that obviously will become quite important. Clearly, cold chain needs and any additional imminent gaps beyond what you might not have identified already through a TCE request will be important to note, and certainly still with the framing of prioritizing vaccines that are stored at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius or at -20 degrees Celsius. So one important thing to note is that ultra cold chain equipment is still kind of, for the moment, considered low on the priority list, because some of the cross-cutting investments are expected to go into procuring UCC equipment. And then finally, and this speaks, I think, to a point that Anne raised at the beginning around some of the other upcoming webinars, one of the things that we really want to encourage is that countries think through some innovative initiatives that they might want to pilot with some of these bigger window of CDS support, in particular, digital micro-planning, things that will really help in the rollout of the vaccine. So with that, I'm going to put into the chat the link to the CDS programming guidance for everyone, and that's there in both English and French. And I will hand it over then to you, Louis, for the next phase of walking through how we do the, oh, sorry, Angela, I'll hand it back to you. And then we can walk through the process, and if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thanks so much. That's really informative, particularly given the newness of this, as well as all these moving parts. I wanted to flag a few questions in the box, maybe Lindsay, if you can answer, and also note that someone asked about a filled out form. And so hopefully when we go through the demo, that will be helpful. If not, then please let us know in the chat, and then we will go ahead and find a way to make sure things are clear and either send screenshots or a sample. The first question we have is around safety, how safety is going to be funded. I don't know if you can speak to whether or not that's included or not included. And then I've kind of flagged two other short ones before we migrate over. Do you want to speak a bit to the safety and how safety will be funded, or whether or not it's included in this support? I think you're on mute, Lindsay.
I am, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to get myself back to full screen. So if we're talking about, I think, and I didn't see the question, I'm sorry, I was trying to browse through the chat. If we're talking about safety surveillance, that is something certainly that you can use CDS funds to support. And so important in that is, what is your plan? What are you, if you don't have already a kind of strong surveillance system established, what are you doing to strengthen your surveillance system? Specifically identifying what are the needs there, and then clearly the budget around that. But that is absolutely something that you can use CDS funding for.
Great. The other two questions we have, if I may also ask you, is around the carryover funds. If funds are not requested through the early access, can they be carried over and requested under the core CDS application?
Yes. So as I spoke to in the kind of principles piece, one of the kind of key guiding principles is making sure we have equity of access. So if countries don't come in through this initial window, if you would rather wait for the full window to be open, that's certainly something you can do. And it doesn't in any way put at risk the funding that was made available through the early window.
If I may ask you one last question, if you can kind of touch on the cost sharing framework agreement, what it means to a country who signs the agreement. What happens if an AMC country chooses not to sign this agreement with Gavi?
So that is a bit outside of the CDS window of support. I'm happy to touch on that a little bit, although some of my other colleagues will be better placed to elaborate on it in more detail. So with the cost sharing framework, what I can tell you from a high level is that the idea there is that beyond this initial 20% of doses that the COVAX facility is aiming to be able to supply to AMC 92 countries, there is a question and a desire for countries to then start to cost share in the same way that countries that the Gavi eligible countries that are supported for the rest of their kind of childhood immunization portfolio co-finance vaccines for all of the vaccine portfolio. And so they're really I think we are still at the stage, although one of my colleagues will need to answer this in more detail than I, of still trying to see what people can co-finance and how that might work. And I have to say, I think that's a question that we probably need to come back to with more details on, because I'm not sure of the latest thinking on that as the COVAX portfolio has shifted, as more vaccine suppliers have come in.
Great. Thanks so much. I see the questions coming in, so keep on coming. We'll try to answer them as we go along the way. Why don't we shift now, being mindful of time, to give you a taste of and walk you through how to actually upload your application onto the platform. We have some questions on the platform application itself, so we'll try to answer those as you take a look-see at the walkthrough. Over to you, Louis.
Thank you, Angela. So I'm going to now show you how to upload the application onto the Timecodes platform. So for the EMC countries, the EMC countries are the ones who would do this. 2/3 are managed by Gavi and 1/3 by UNICEF. We're going to talk about those who are managed by Gavi at the moment. The process for those who are managed by UNICEF will be forthcoming, and as soon as that information is available, we will let everybody know, and we will have demo sessions, which I will talk about after the presentation. Just for your information afterwards, because these slides will be shared, these are the different countries that are managed by either UNICEF or Gavi. So here is the demonstration for entering the applications into the platform. So the first person that will sign in and put things into the platform are vaccine country admins, WHO staff, vaccine country admins, or the vaccine regional admins could step in if for any reason the vaccine country admins cannot do so. So just to emphasize that what you're going to see is from the demo site. You might see some data, just remember it is not accurate because this is just for demonstration purposes. In order to get to the proper page, you click onto the info tab and then you select the country info. Once you are on the country info tab, you choose the country. You can see this ellipse on the right. You can either scroll down until you find the country that you're looking for, or you can just type in the name. In this case, I typed in Senegal to go ahead and show you. You would then scroll down until you find the Gavi folder. There it is. You click on it. And as soon as you click on it, there are some documents that there are links to documents, this CDS funding request early access document, the COVAX CDS program funding guidelines, these will just download. There's some application information. If you click on that, it will tell you about a bit about the review process. The dashboard is new. What you want to do is click on the add button. As soon as you click on that add button, it will come up with the form that can be filled out online. So this is for the first round, as you can see at number 1. Phase number 2 is where you would put the funding that is requested, and number 3 would be the description. I have filled them out, as you can see here. I put $650,000 US in the funding, and I just put in description of immediate fundings just as a sample. Then if you scroll down, you will see the different categories that need to be filled in. Here you just put in the percentage of the funds that are going to be used, that you want to use to these categories, and you can put a smart description in the key activities here. Now, this slide is to show you that if for any reason the total number does not equal to 100, because you can see here it's 110, you will not be able to save the form. If it is below 100%, you will not be able to save the form. Then at the bottom of the form, this is where you would put the names of the recipients, okay, and the total funds, the funds for each recipient. As you can see here, if you remember, at the top we put in $650,000, and here we put $500,000 for recipient 1 and $100,000 for recipient 2. Because it doesn't match, you cannot save the form. Even though you have 100%, the 100% is there, you cannot save the form. So you just need to make sure that all 3 are done, that the total funds match the total funds at the top, and that you have 100%. Once you've done this, you can just save. So all this is being done by the vaccine country admin. Once that is saved on the page, you will notice that the status of the form, this whole bar would be created. You can then download a generated form. You take the vaccine country admin will then take it to the Ministry of Health for a signature. Once it is signed, it will be scanned, and then it will be uploaded with this document, this button here. This is just a generic upload button. As you can see, the CDS request funding signed is here. You click on upload, it is uploading now. And as soon as that happens, a notification will be sent to all of these people. Okay, the vaccine country admin, the vaccine regional admin, the program manager, the senior country manager, WHO and UNICEF and Gavi. Now, once that happens, the program manager will then come onto the platform and do the following. The program manager will see that there has been a submitted request, and the program manager will then do a quick review. So the program manager, as you can see, the signed application now has a downward arrow. The program manager will download the signed form. The program manager will check it by clicking the icon on the right. It is also possible to view the document with the little eye that you see here, but the review will be done with the button on the right. As you click the review button, you will see this little pop-up will open, and there is a file there which just gives the program manager just a checklist of what to look for when doing the review. And it is a very simple checklist. I believe there are 6 items on it. And once the program manager has done the review offline, they can then choose the status of the review. There are 3 options. The request is either has minor revisions that needs to be done, major revisions that needs to be done, or the quality check is successful. So I will go through all 3 very quickly, just so you see what the steps will then include. So in this case, I will start with the major revisions request. So choose that, put the comment here. The box where change total funding is expandable. So the program manager can fill in any information. And basically this is intended for the vaccine country admin to understand what revisions need to be done and how to change it. So as soon as that is done, a notification is sent again to all the people. And then now the vaccine country admin comes onto the platform to do the changes because a notification has been sent to them. So the vaccine country admin then, as you can see, major revisions have been requested. So the vaccine country admin will then click on the pen, and that would allow them to edit the form that had already been filled out. So as you can see, the comment that I had put earlier, change total funding request, has now been put here. And of course, if the program manager puts more, the instructions would be here. So in this case, the funding request was to be changed. In the next slide, as you can see, I've changed it, but you notice that the save button is no longer possible. It doesn't work anymore, has been grayed out. The reason for that is because we changed the total funds, these funds here don't match anymore. So what you need to do is just change these to reflect the new total fund, and then you save. Once you have saved, because it's considered a major revision, the signature from the Ministry of Health is needed. So the vaccine country admin will repeat the steps from earlier, download the edited form, take it to the ministry, have it signed, scanned, bring it back and upload it into the platform. Once it has been uploaded into the platform, so this, for the review, it will be a notification will be sent to all the different people, and here it will be the program manager who will come again and do a review. So these should have been there. So once the program manager does the review, in this case now, I'm going to go through the minor revisions. So this one, it's an even shorter process. So minor revisions, then with the reasons for the revision here, press submit. And a notification will be sent to everyone that the review has been done. Then the vaccine country admin will come in, click on the edit button, come in, see what the reviews, what the reasons are, make the changes, save. And because it is not a it is not a major revision, a signature from the Ministry of Health is not needed. A notification will be sent to the program manager, to everyone. The program manager will sign on again, come in, review. This time, the quality check is successful. The program manager will just click submit. And once it is submitted, a resource need will be created on the platform for that country. And then a notification will be sent to all these different parties, again, letting them know that the quality check was successful, and the senior country management will then send on the letter. And just so you know, all of these different steps are archived on the platform. So at any point, this little clock can be clicked, and it will show you all the different steps of the process. This process has launched since the beginning of July, as Lindsay said. At the moment, we are conducting daily open houses to help people if they have access issues, if they have questions, if they need clarifications. So please feel free to join us. We have sessions in Spanish as well on Wednesdays from 12 to 2, on Tuesday from 12 to 2 in French, and the rest of the days it will be in English from 12 to 2, and this is until Friday, the 23rd of July. Thank you. Over to you, Angela.
Great. So if you take a look at the slide prior, I think we have a poll question, is what I saw on the slide. So why don't we
Yes.
get that poll question up on the screen for folks to see? I'll read it again for folks who might be on the telephone. So if we have that poll question up, Louis, or Echo, why don't we get that up for the group? I also see a lot of these questions are being answered, but not all of them. So we will start the poll. And the first poll question is, after this webinar, I'm aware of how the Partners platform can be used to request CDS funding, and I intend to use this functionality. The answer choices are yes, no, or maybe. And I believe that's the only question. If it's not, if someone can flag that for me. So as folks are doing that question, then why don't we give folks some time to take a look-see. And while these questions are getting answered so quickly, it looks like I don't necessarily need to answer. So as you are responding, the question will take one question off the queue, which is it possible for the funding to be managed by only Ministry of Health without involvement of partners such as NGOs? Let me kick that over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, I'm trying to go through the questions as fast as I can. The answer to that one is that all Gavi, any existing Gavi fund recipient can be a recipient of the CDS early access funds. The specifics on whether it can only be the MOH without any other involvement of partners will very much depend on the specific country context and any grant management requirements that are in place. So I hesitate to give a full answer to that question, or give a more kind of definitive answer to that question. What we would encourage you to do is to be kind of broad in thinking through who is going to implement this funding and implement the response, noting that it's probably going to take more than one recipient and one funder to effectively roll out a large scale up in these vaccines.
Great, thanks so much. Let's duck over to the responses from the polling question, and then we'll shift to knocking out a few more questions. So yes, this is great. 2/3, 3/4 have said that they're now aware of the Partners platform, and that can be used to request the CDS funding and intend to use this functionality. and that maybe is also quite promising. So we're glad to hear that folks will be executing through the platform. I would like to do a plug for the platform, recognizing there's backup ways to do it, but there's a lot of benefits to going through the platform, both for speed, efficiency, and for internal processing as well. And so recognizing that countries have different reasons for doing different things, we highly encourage and request people to go through the platform to help expedite the application. And so in the questions that we have in the box, Louis, maybe you could talk about admin access on uploading the application, while Lindsay, I point you to the other part of Santosh's question. So Louis, let's point to you, and then Lindsay, I'll hand it over to you thereafter.
Sorry, Angela, which question?
Who will have admin access to upload the application? Ministry of Health, Country Office, WHO, UNICEF, SCM. So maybe you can go through step one in terms of who are doing the upload.
Okay, so yeah, so for doing the upload, it would be the vaccine country admin, and it would be a WHO staff that would be who's appointed the vaccine country admin. They are the ones who upload the application, basically fill in the information onto the website, download it, and get it signed by the Ministry of Health. Now, should vaccine country admin not be able to do any reason, the vaccine regional admin can be a backup. But the vaccine regional admin is supposed to be only the backup if the vaccine country admin cannot do it.
And Tosh, I don't know if you're still on. It's the same format as we have for the NDVP. We can also send a slide on the specific allowances for who has that admin access, which I think is where you're going with this question. So we can go ahead and include that as part of the package thereafter if this was not clear enough. The second part of that question is directed to Lindsay about expanding on the allocation of the ceiling envelope for early access. Would this be the same process for the second tranche for the core CDS, i.e. part 2? So Lindsay, you have a two-part question. The first on sounds like how we got to the allocation ceiling, and the second is it the same for the core application? Lindsay, if you're there.
Angela, yeah, I'm here. So the answer to the first part of the question is that the ceilings were calculated using a modified version of our HSS formula. So obviously we have more countries that we're doing allocations for in the AMC 92 context than we do in our normal Gavi countries that are eligible for our HSS support. And we've also made modifications for the COVID-19 context. So have taken into account kind of population figures that are more looking at eligible populations for COVID-19 vaccines. But at a high level, that's how it's been done in a way to make countries, can you still hear me? You can, okay, great.
Yes.
I think I'm losing microphone on my earplugs. So at a high level, that's how it's been done in a way to make the allocation of funding as equitable as possible. There's a floor that's put in for every country and also a ceiling amount. So some countries can't go below a certain amount or above. But in essence, that's how it was done for the first tranche. For the second, the idea really, and that's why we want to really emphasize the importance of having a strong NDVP with clearly identified and costed gaps in funding. We really are looking at what is the need for countries in terms of funding the vaccine rollout, and making sure that we're trying to support kind of filling gaps where they exist. And so it's not yet clear if or what formula may or may not sit behind that, but that's where the kind of a better picture of the funding needs becomes quite essential in this. So just to tee up also that the additional webinars that are coming your way in terms of thinking through how to do costing and budgeting are quite essential. And we really want to encourage everybody to kind of think through, the totality of what you need, especially now that you understand the specifics of rolling out the vaccines in more detail, and make sure that the gaps are very clear, which from the first wave of NDVPs, as Ula mentioned, we didn't have quite as clear a picture.
Great, thanks so much. Louis, can you answer the question in the text box about troubleshooting for submission? And the next question I have is, can the humanitarian agencies apply through this platform, or is it for governments only? It looks like Ula is also typing something, but Lindsay, maybe you could answer that directly from Gavi.
Sure, I can come in on the humanitarian piece. So there is a specific humanitarian buffer that has been set up that is being managed through its own distinct process with a consortium of humanitarian partners. So there's an application form, there's funding that's made available for that. Now, if you are a well, in the context of all of the AMC 92 countries, humanitarian partners to our existing Gavi fund recipients, there is nothing to keep you from being one of the fund recipients for this CDS early access window that we're discussing today. You need to make sure that you're kind of working in concert with the ICC and the overall kind of approach of the country for that application. So you can't apply separately through this window just as a humanitarian partner. It needs to come through the country application.
Great. It looks like we are plugging through really quickly. So the question I have on deck is it possible that we also include vaccination performance in the request? For example, vaccines delivered versus vaccines administered from the previous allocation. So I'm reading it verbatim, but I dare not to try to translate this. Maybe I translate wrong. So you can see it in the Q&A box. Alana, I don't know if you want to provide more details, if this is part of justifying activities, or Lindsay, I don't know if this is enough for you.
Maybe I can try to answer that
Sure.
one. I think if that's a question around whether in your application you should speak to your current experience with delivery of COVID-19 vaccines, the answer is absolutely yes, and across all programmatic and financial aspects of delivery of that vaccine. So I think if you, in particular, as you think about updating your NDVP, certainly taking into account kind of what has been the lived experience thus far with delivery of COVID-19 vaccines, and therefore why have you potentially changed your strategy, or what modifications have you made to your strategy to improve it based on that experience, that is always welcome. Similarly with the costing, and I saw that in one of the other Q&A questions, some things that you budgeted for in the past may have been either under or over budgeted. The example in the Q&A was for AFI surveillance. So if as you're implementing things, understanding that they cost more than you initially anticipated, clearly updating those and being able to articulate, why is also quite important. So certainly do take into consideration your experiences rolling out the vaccine when you do updates to your NDVP and any of the budget gaps.
Great, I think that's really good answer. If we didn't answer it, please rechat in the box. Let's see if we can squeeze a few more in before we call for time. Let me see. Can countries have access to the review checklist as a way of doing their self-assessment before submitting the application?
So for the CDS, for this early access window, what you need to provide is actually a fairly limited amount of information. You would have seen from what Louis just showed, and also the 5 questions that were in the PowerPoint that I presented. It's really 5 very high-level questions. The key thing that you need to ensure when you are putting together your kind of 2-page request form is that you have a clear idea of what activities you want funding for, and that those activities are eligible for funding through the CDS window. And there you'll see in the chat, I have provided the link to both the English and the French versions of the funding guidelines. So please take a look at those. But as I said at the beginning, there are not that many things that are ineligible. Obviously, you can't use the funding for vaccines or devices, but most of the activities that you would want to support are eligible. You just need to make sure that you're working within the parameters that have been established in the funding guidelines. For the bigger support window, as we kind of further articulate that and understand kind of what the requirements will be, we'll make sure to be as explicit as we can in the guidelines on, what we're expecting from applicants, so that we get rid of as much of the mystery there as possible.
Thanks, Lindsay. I've also, as best as I can, typed these as well. To reiterate, it's a short application. It's 2 pages. And having a clear idea of what the activities for funding really comprises the crux of the application. So hopefully that answers the question. Let's see if we can squeeze 1 or 2 in. How will the supply chain for vaccines be maintained? Some people have taken a first jab. Due to short expiry, the vaccines may not be available for second. Will this vacuum have an impact on effectiveness? Great question, Data Stanley. I'm not sure if that's specific to the CDS application, but I see Ann Lindstrom is available. Ann?
So if I understand right, what you're talking about is the, if you would, is it mix and match that you give one vaccine first and second? Is that what the question
was? It doesn't say, but it sounds like that is somewhat implicit in it. So maybe we can start there. And
yeah, because what we understand right now is the complexities that you are facing. That the first lot of COVAX vaccine that came out was from the AstraZeneca or the SII, and we all know how the difficulties it has been to be able to give the second dose of the same vaccine because of the trickling down and the manufacturing problems and the surge of cases in India, which meant that there were much less supplies than we had first allocated and hoped to send to countries. And now you're faced with having other kinds of vaccine coming in, Moderna, J&J, Pfizer. And of course, every country then thinks about what can we give as a second dose. The only data and evidence we have on any of the mix and match schedules is a permissive use in supply shortage from SAGE that has said, looked at the data, and you've seen data from the UK, for example, that if you start with a AstraZeneca as the first dose and then you give the Pfizer dose as the second one, you actually have a very good immune response and you have an acceptable safety profile as well. So that one is a permissive mix and match schedule, which is of course off-label because it's not being EUL'd for that type. But in dire situations and when you don't have a choice, that is one schedule of mix and match. There are other ongoing studies about the mix and match schedules. And I know this is going to be very complex in all countries, where the number of different vaccines that are now coming out through, for example, the donations of COVAX or bilateral donations or the procurements that you're all doing. I mean, it's a massive complexity for program managers, healthcare workers to work with all these different vaccines. And I don't know how you solve it in your different countries. If you divide the doses into different parts of the countries, or I guess we need to be flexible, but the science is only supporting so far the knowledge we have about giving AstraZeneca first and then the Pfizer vaccine. And no other studies so far have been published on any other combination vaccines.
Great, thanks so much, Anne. Why don't we shift to the last slide, Louis? We have a few kind of closing remarks. It looks like we answered much of the queue. If you have questions, keep them coming. We want to be able to answer all the questions that you have, so keep them coming in. As we close out, we have some webinar materials that will be available on TechNet. We can also send that out through CRT as well as through the Partners platform. All the 4,000 users on the Partners platform, of which around 1,300 are vaccine specific, we can send a note specifically around this as well. So hopefully that will be helpful to get it, if not once, but from multiple places. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can ask about your additional questions, share experiences. We have a top-notch team at TechNet, as many of you know and probably part of. Next slide. To set up in the last few minutes, we wanted to kind of queue up what we have next. The recordings from this session, as well as other sessions, as always, will be available. Recordings from this particular session will be available in English, French, and Spanish, which is hopefully a good cue for me to really thank our translators, always doing an amazing job in simultaneous translation, as well as priming and cueing the audience. So I'm much grateful, thanks to all of you in your effortless translation. It's quite seamless. The next set of sessions we have come of somewhat as a pair. They are different times to accommodate for different time zones. It's not noted here, but the first one will be in French as well. And then the second one, anchored around the Paho region, will also be in Spanish and potentially in French as well. We encourage you to register for that. This rounds out kind of the first 3 sessions centered on costing, given the really importance that Ula laid out. Using the civic tools specifically can be new to many countries, particularly getting the costing numbers in the application and supporting the updates to the NDPP. We saw a number of NDPP questions in the queue, in the Q&A. And so these identical sessions will provide more details on how to use the civic tool. It's a version 2.2 now, just to flag for you, and how to use it quickly to respond to this application as well as the core application. The WHO costing team will be available live to answer questions. We really encourage you, this is designed a little bit differently than other ones, a little bit more hands-on, and we encourage you to sign up for one or both of these as you can. Next slide. Most important slide, questions. Well, first of all, is thank you to all the participants, to the panelists. As always, an amazing job, and extra thanks to the ECHO team, India and across the globe, a top-notch team, and a pleasure to work with y'all. The questions related to the session topic today that aren't answered during the session will be shared with the technical experts and then answered, and we'll share those via email. It sounds like we have a lot of questions as typical on how to access the helpful slides as well as the Q&A. So we'll get that out as broadly as possible. We end exactly now at 7:30 or whatever, 1/2 wherever time zone you are. And to Echo and Lindstrom, thank you all for joining us in the first session of the second series. And we hope to see you for many more through the end of the year. Thanks again to the panelists, thanks to the translators, and thanks to the Echo team. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, and evening. Ciao. Thank you, guys. And I think we can stop the recording.